Ask the Podcast Coach for December 28th, 2024.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is for the last time in 2024. It's the music that means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from theschoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy last Saturday of 2024. That is kind of weird. It's been a fast year. It has gone, but we say that all the time, right? As you get older, it gets a little bit faster. Hopefully, maybe we'll talk about this during the show. Lots of things as podcasters to think about coming up to get ready for whatever's happening in 2025. So I'll mention some of those as we roll along.
Yeah, absolutely. But the one thing that no matter what year it is, a good way to start off your year is with one of those. That's right, a piping hot cup of Java. And that coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. The beautiful thing of Mark is he's done a lot of work for me, whether it's Ask the Podcast Coach or School of Podcasting or Podcast Rodeo Show. He also did your podcast website, the Podcast Hot Seat. He knows what he's doing. He makes really pretty artwork. In fact, if you need an entire website, Mark got you from head to toe. He is good to go, and he's an award-winning graphic artist as well as a podcaster. And he's going to just blow you away with his service, because on Fiverr, they want you to come up with the marketing idea and kind of what it looks like, and then they try to map what's in your head. Mark's like, hey, let me listen to your show. Let me see what you got. Tell me about your show. Let his marketing mind do the magic, and then you can approve it. And he's going to give you more than one thing to look at. It's just a great service for the price. And you got to remember, they're going to see you before they hear you. So there's only one place to go, and that, of course, is podcastbranding.co. Tell him Dave and Jim sent you.
Of course, big thanks to our good friend Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast.com. If you didn't catch it last week, a lot of folks on the road this weekend are traveling. I'm glad that's not me. But if you are traveling, if you need another podcast to listen to, Indiana Jones Collection is out over there at Based on a True Story Podcast, and I'm sure worth a listen. If you haven't caught it yet, get out there and get it done. If you're an Indiana Jones fan, and who isn't, how much of that is based on a true story? Find out. Based on a True Story Podcast.com.
Yeah, Dan's brand was working hard this weekend. I saw the movie The Fire Within about this Olympic boxer. Phenomenal athlete, great story, but it starts off, and of course the screen goes black, based on a true story. And I was like, Dan! So his brand is very much
old strong.
Yeah. So 24 is we got another 3 days of this, and then we're done. So I guess we should talk about what should we be. I know one especially. Go in to whoever your domain is through and make sure it's set to auto renew, and make sure the card on file is a good one, because I used to own the domain podfade.com, and something happened that the card it was associated with wasn't, and something, and so it went into the wild. And by the time I figured it out, I forget it. It's SP's co-host over at Better Podcasting. I can see his face, but anyway, he owns it. And I was like, hey, like, that was mine. Like, oopsie, can I have that back? And he went, no. And I was like, well, how dare you?
Good day,
sir. So, which is good. That's $13 a year that I'm not paying for a domain that I'm going. I should do something with that. I have a lot of those.
Right. You weren't doing anything with it anyways. That's a good reminder, Dave, to check even your host provider and anything you're paying for on a regular basis. If you've had a credit card, like my credit card, I got issued new ones, and the year, right? The expiration year changed, and I got a new code. Okay, all those things are going to have to be input. It's kind of a pain, but all those things are going to have to be inputted in some of those services. Some things they'll run it. They'll tell you, hey, this failed. I had a subscription service where they sent me a nice note and said, "Hey, we'd really like to continue to have you as a customer. Can you give us your updated credit card information?" Some folks won't do that. It'll just expire and go away and you're done. So if you've had a credit card change of any kind in 2024, this is a good time to go back and just check your subscriptions. I would even say, Dave, this might be a good time to start logging your subscriptions. So go in, get an Excel spreadsheet or whatever you use, Lotus 123, if that's the case, whatever you happen to use.
It's 1991, everyone.
If you're still using that, write it down in a word. You can use a notepad, document, whatever. But write down. I'm getting ready to do this with both the warranty things that I've purchased and the subscriptions that I have, and the online like not movie subscriptions, but like the streaming subscriptions, Netflix
Oh, yeah.
and those. I'm just going to make lists of those with how much I'm paying. One, I think it's good to have some visibility on those things, and two, it's a good idea to know what you're doing and are you really using it enough. So those would be some great end of the year activities, I think, to keep track of some subscription stuff.
Especially because not every service, let's say you sign up for a year of blah, blah, blah. And then that comes through and it's not $13 anymore. Now it's, 150 something. Write that down, because most of the things that I do that with do not let me know, hey, remember a year ago when you signed up for this? Well, it's coming again, because they kind of don't want it, because in some cases I forgot about them. And now I have gone in, I've had some charge me and I'll be like, oh, I haven't used that in months. And I will email them and say, any chance that thing you just charged me for, can I get a refund? And I've yet to have anybody say no. But it's not really the companies like you, when you signed up and said, yes, bill me every year, they're assuming that that means every year you're going to get billed. But I've heard people like, I don't understand why you're not notifying me. And I'm like, because you signed up under, as far as I know, you weren't drunk or, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't know it was up to me to do that.
Check the box and note that whether it's monthly or it's annual, those annual ones are a booger to remember. And you're like,
yeah.
Oh, I have a few at work that were set to just auto renew on the work card. And then I would get a note from our accounting department that month, like, hey, are you charging? Oh, that's an automatic subscription, right? Type deal. So I think it's a good idea to have those, maybe a column of monthly. Here's my monthly and the totals, and here's annual and when it hits. So you have some idea. Not that you're going to look at this all the time, but I think it's just a good study. And, I think like I signed up for 11 Labs last month or 2 months ago to do some work at work. And I thought I'd use it more, and I'm not. And so the question is, I think I'm on the $20 plan or whatever it is. Do I still need that? Those credits roll over, and
yeah,
but it's just a good idea to go through and from an accounting practice, think, okay, what do I want to spend in the new year? It's also a good idea to maybe start listing some of your income streams. Hey, what am I getting through Google Ads? Or what does my Amazon affiliate look like? Or what the whatever affiliate relationships that I have, how have those performed in 2024? So while I think my next recommendation is it's time today to start thinking about your taxes for 2025. It may be a good opportunity to start gathering some of those income streams too, to make sure you report all of them and you know how to report them, you know where they're coming from. Because gone are the days, Dave. I used to remember when you got stuff in the mail and it came to your mailbox outside, and you would go grab it, and all your 1099s and W2s and 8794s and whatever those things are, they'd mail them to you, and it was easy for me to keep track. Today, you get an email that says, hey, you can come pick up your whatever, come pick up your
right,
your tax form and that's a different habit. So maybe a good opportunity to say, okay, what are my podcasting income streams? By the way, when you're putting this all together, and Ralph is, I'm sure, agreeing with me on all this, as you're putting all of this, because he's a finance guy, right?
Yeah.
Now you have a debit and a credit of your podcast. Like, here's all the things it's costing me on a monthly basis or on an annual basis. here's all my income streams that I have coming in. And then look at the two. Now, one doesn't have to be bigger than the other. Well, no, actually, one does have to be
Have
bigger
to be
than
bigger
the
than the other.
other. But the
You
debt
hope.
can be bigger than the income, and that's okay. Hopefully, the income's bigger than the debt. But you can compare the two and at least know. This may be the first time because some of us, Dave, we don't want to know because we're like, if I'm losing, if I'm not making as much as I'm spending, then I'm not successful, and maybe I don't, that brings up some bad emotions. But I think knowing that is really, really helpful in your podcasting. So if you've been avoiding it, maybe 2025 is the year you get good accounting. Doesn't mean you have to stop if that's if you're, because listen, we all spend money on the whiskey I buy has no benefit back to me, right? I mean, I drink it, but that's about it, right? We do things that cost more than they make, and that's okay. But to know it, I think is it gives us a little peace of mind, I think, to at least know it, be like, okay, this is where I'm at. And here's some things I could do.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. I use an app called, I believe I want to say, I can't remember if it's Wave or Waze. And if I can get my stupid Wave, W-A-V, okay, so it's waveapps.com. And I believe they have a free version. I think it's $16 a month. But that's all it does. It tracks income and expenses tied into my bank. I have a bank account that's just School of Podcasting stuff. And it makes it super easy to go, oh, wow. Plus, I use SoFi for my banking online. And their savings account, I'm not going to retire on it, but at least I'm earning interest on that. And so I take 30% of what I make every month and put it aside for Uncle Sam. And then I'm paying my quarterly taxes and all that stuff. But Waves is a great, waveapps.com is, it used to be always free. And then they finally, which is shocking coming in from a financial place, they determined that free was not a good business model. And so they're like, hey, like all the really good features are now you have to pay for them. I'm like, good. Because it used to make me mad on occasion. They would have a little bit of a sputter where all of a sudden they wouldn't connect to my bank the way I wanted them to. And what was I going to do? Not pay them anymore? So I love the fact that I'm paying them now because I'm like, hey, like fix this or I'm out of here. So that's an easy way to do that. I want to throw this in here early. Ray from Around the Layout said, I missed the deadline for question of the month, which was yesterday. I wanted to tell you how my favorite podcast also annoys me. Well, Ray, because it's you or anybody else watching right now, if you can get that to me by, say, 1 o'clock Eastern, that's probably when I'll really start working on that.
Today, 1 o'clock Eastern
today. So, yeah, so if you're listening to this later.
In podcast form.
Yeah. But if you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/question, it's the question of the month. It's what's your favorite podcast and why? So let's throw that at Jim since we're talking about that. Do you need time to think? What's your favorite show? Tell me a little bit about it, and then why is it your favorite?
Yeah, this year I started listening to the Wall Street Journal's podcast, and just 15 minutes of news, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And
interesting.
Based on all the things that have been going on, we went through an election cycle here in the United States. It's been helpful to just kind of keep up with the news, but not too much of it. I can't have a cable news network on all day. So,
well, that was going to be my question. Is it? I always thought that was a little left leaning, is a little right. I would love to find something in the middle.
Well, I think the middle is elusive. You got to kind of wonder. And listen, I work for a company that does a lot of polling, and if the polling comes out and it's not what you think, we're the other direction, then so people, it's crazy. Anyways, doesn't matter. It's fine for me, works for me, and I try to think about the news, not just listen to it. So it is a source. I sometimes in the mornings I'm on the treadmill and I watch the local news as well. But that has been a new podcast that has been good for me to listen to, just to stay up on all the things that are going on.
Well, that's it, because it was weird that probably starting on the 23rd. So for 5 days, I haven't seen any news at all. It's all Christmas stuff and football games and stuff like that. And so when I finally came back, I was kind of like, wait, some guy ran over 200 people in Germany or something like that. Some really nasty. And I was like, and there was a part of me that's like, I feel bad, obviously, for everyone involved in that. But there's a part of me that's like, I kind of like not knowing about the horrors of the world.
Well, and of course, the more we get engaged in it, the more we think it's getting worse and worse. And I kind of want to say it's always been bad.
Yeah, it's just more reported on.
In the 70s, my parents thought the world was ending. I remember those days, and they're like, "This is the end of the world," and you're like, "Oh, okay, we're still here." So it is, there's some opportunities. I think, like I said, I think for me, thinking about this, and maybe this is another end of the year exercise, look through your podcatcher or your podcast player. And if you've got some things you've stopped listening to, just unsubscribe from them. Like, I know if they're automatically downloading and you're not listening to them, your podcaster's not happy about that. So if you're not currently listening to it, because you know what, if you want to listen to it again, you can always search for it, find it, resubscribe.
Right.
It's not that hard. Yeah.
Well, the other thing, it seemed like every company I logged into was like, here's your year-end wrap-up based on the whole Spotify thing. And I saw somebody say, I wish like their media host did this. I think Buzzsprout did something that was kind of a wrap-up. And I'm like, it's not that hard. Go into your media host, and I would download, because I'm an old Excel nerd, but I would download my stats as a CSV file and open them either in Google Sheets or Excel or whatever. Lotus 123, we'll throw that back again. Because then you could go in and say, look, just give me the episodes that were released in 2024 and then sort that by number of downloads. Now, obviously, the one you released last week is not going to have as many downloads as the one you released in January. But you should, what's interesting is those should be somewhat either hopefully going in the right direction, or if they're kind of stagnant, it's like the only time when things being stagnant are kind of good, because if something did jump out, it'll show like, hey, I always get whatever, 1,200 downloads or whatever your downloads are. And all of a sudden you get one that's like 1,800. You're like, whoa, what happened here? And just look for those things that maybe did a little better than the other. You might see that, hey, I only did, 5 interviews this year, and all of them did better than my other, episodes. Maybe I should do more interviews, or vice versa. When I do an interview, and look, you can go into Apple and look at completion rates. And now is the time, as much as we say, don't go crazy digging into your stats. This would be a good time to dig into your stats, not to go crazy, but just look for anything that's like, oh, I think I see a trend here where, that might do that.
Yeah. Maybe set some targets too for 2025 to say, hey, while I'm in here looking at my stats, there's a few things that I'm going to monitor throughout the year. Because I think sometimes we just open the stats and we get overwhelmed by them and like, what does any of this mean? And if you're going to spend a bunch of time at the end of the year looking at them, learn a few things, set a few targets, and say, hey, I'm going to try this and hope it has a movement on that. As an example, at the beginning of 2024, I thought, okay, I'm going to do some intentional work to see if I can move my Amazon affiliate link numbers more, right? That's a hard thing to do. You got to separate people from their money. I mean, they're purchasing maybe on Amazon already. I have a big Amazon audience, the folks that listen to my podcast. So I put a new link out, started, checked all the rules and all this stuff to make sure I was fine and doing what I was doing, and put that out there. And amazingly, those numbers started to move, because I was focusing on it, right? I was being intentional about it. Now I saw a big spike, and then I saw a dip, and now it's kind of coming into some averages. Does any of that really matter? Well, yeah, it matters to me. Is it a lot of money? No, maybe less than $200 in the year, right? So it's not I can't even afford a burger at McDonald's for $200 these days, but it's a little bit of money. And then some of the things that you do, you start thinking like, okay, how could I move that more? What kind of things could I do? Could I be more intentional about my show notes with it? Can I do more things on the podcast to talk about it? Right. Am I getting negative feedback on it? Am I talking about it too much? So it gives you some things to kind of measure.
Well, you have to be careful with Amazon, because if you say, hey, go out to the website, click on the Amazon link, it helps support the show, you just broke your terms of service. That's why I use a service called Genius Link. And I'll have a link in the show notes for that. But it basically, when they click on the Genius link, which then behind the scenes uses your affiliate link, it takes them to a page that says, this isn't, here's where this is available, because you can have a link to Amazon and Walmart and Best Buy and B&H, but it kind of says, hey, the link you're clicking on is an affiliate. So, because I didn't realize you can't put affiliate links from Amazon in a newsletter. Like, that breaks the term. There are all sorts of, Amazon makes it really hard to promote their stuff. I'm like, why? What's the whole point? But yeah, it is it's one of those things where once you sign up, if you remember to put those links, I think I made, I don't know, $13 this month from people buying microphones on Amazon. So, but how much work did I do for that? Nothing, and then I have a page on my website that's like, hey, if you're shopping at these places, please use this link. I earned something for that. And, you never know. So
the one thing I hated about doing links or hey, you should buy this microphone or whatever,
right,
is people would buy it through your affiliate link or whatever. Then they'd have a problem with it and they come back to you.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, guy, yes, you bought it through my affiliate link, but, and yes, I do recommend it, but you bought it from the company and they have support. And you should contact their support. I can't fix it for you. I can't make it right. Well, don't you know somebody? No, I don't know somebody over there. I mean, just contact their support. They'll take care of you.
We have that at Podpage. We are not an email service, but we integrate with MailChimp and Constant Contact and MailerLite. And so I'll explain that to people and I'll be like, you just copy the code from, MailerLite and paste it into Podpage and your forum shows up. And they're like, okay, and then they'll ask a very MailerLite ConvertKit, whoever it is. And I'm like, yeah, that's not us. I showed you where to paste it, but it's, it's kind of interesting. We had a comment come in. Mark said, whilst doing research before launching our new movie podcast, we found a gap in advice aimed at podcasts who aren't selling a product. Places, of course, are a program, so they don't have their own products or services. There seemed to be a lack of advice on launching, growing, and particularly monetizing shows that are non-guest, just purely entertainment. Well, okay, so how do you make money with a podcast? Selling your own products and services? Nope. Okay, so what does that leave? Affiliates, right? You can do with movies. It's kind of tough because you got to find a product that fits. Then you've got what we'll call premium content. So maybe ad-free stuff, bonus content. Then you get into ads. Now, if you are one of the, 8% of people that are getting 20,000 downloads an episode. So if I say 8%, that means 92% of podcasts don't get enough downloads to do that. Just to be clear, then you can make $20 CPM. So take $20 times 20 is 400. I think the last time I checked. So you're making $400 per ad per episode. And so you're like, but I need to make $1,000 an episode. So now you got to put, 3 ads in minimum, so there's ads. Then there is donations. So buy me a coffee, PayPal, et cetera, et cetera. The thing you need to remember when you are asking your audience to do something and nobody likes this number, and yet, according to the book, Profit from Your Podcast, where I interviewed over 70 different podcasts, you're looking at about 3% of your audience is going to donate. So that is not a great number. I'm not happy about that number, but unfortunately, it's the truth. When I was talking to the head of NPR Plus in Washington, D.C., and I said, I'm not trying to get into your wallet, but what percentage? And he was like, about 1%. And when I talked to the people at Teachable, they said, about 2%. So it's a rough gig. So I hope you like talking about, movies. And, we're talking about Ray. Ray talks about model trains. You have to just love the subject to talk about it, because the other thing is to get enough of an audience to where that 3% starts to pay for gas. for your car, it takes a couple years. And that's if you're really good. Now, if you have a budget to, market and I know Ralph at AskRalphPodcast.com spent a lot of money on Overcast ads, but it grew his audience from, tens of downloads to hundreds. And he's his numbers are definitely going in the right direction. And Ralph is a guy that loves to experiment too. So that's it. That's the only ways to make money. So why I always say sell your own products and services is if I sell a membership for $100 and there's programmatic ads. So this is the Geico, the Blue Aprons. These are the ones that are automatically inserted, are anywhere from $2 per CPM up to about, I usually say 5, maybe 7. For 1,000 downloads, you get $7. And I'm like, Buzzsprout has their ad plan where other podcasts, and now I believe they've opened it to companies, can advertise on your show and you make $14 CPM. They take 6, it's 20. They take 6, you keep 14. But it's just, it's a rough gig. If the goal was to make a living at this, it's a rough gig. It takes a while, and it's hard because you almost need to work on it full time to get the audience going so that you can then do this full time. But the problem is you already have a full-time job. So then you get into the whole, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, that doesn't work because, then you burn yourself out. And this morning I was looking at Reddit, and it's interesting because now as part of my job, I look at Reddit every day and Facebook and all the other places to see what's going on in the community. And so many people are jumping in with video. And I'm like, call me crazy, but they're already confused and a little burned out, and they haven't even started yet. Because, when you add video, it's like saying, hey, you know what? I bought myself an exercise bike for Christmas. I'm going to start biking every day. And then you go, oh, and I'm going to lift weights, and not just weights, it's 500 pounds or whatever. And it gets, kind of crazy that way. So, and you burn out. So that's, again, I'm not anti-video, but I do worry sometimes about that. So
a trend I'm seeing on YouTube, especially among some of the ones I've subscribed to and listened to, is they're just getting out of it. I mean, over the last couple weeks, I've had a few just drop. They're like, you know what? And not just stop making them. They've come on and said, we're done. We're not going to do this anymore. And I think, between all of the, we were talking about the honey scam, and we're talking about, YouTube takes an enormous amount. And yes, they provide the platform, but they've done nothing else for you in a lot of regards. I think some of them are like, wow, we were going to this. And listen, I think the money on YouTube has been good for a while. Now, a couple years back, they gave everybody a haircut. There was there was a big to-do about that. And then I think recently it's just gotten to be so everybody's trying to grab a piece of the pie. And the content creators, the influencers, whatever you want to call them, I think a lot of them are just getting tired of it. They're just like, you know what? I'm going to go do something else. Oh, many of them have moved to their own merch. The ones that I'm seeing are being successful, right? They're selling things, and it goes beyond t-shirts and hats and hoodies, right? Those are great things to sell, but it still works, I think, in the environment where you have a product to sell yourself. I see a lot of companies coming on, and that's just it for them. It's an advertising stream, not a revenue generating stream. And if it generates revenue, awesome, but they're willing to let all that go for basically free advertising. So I am, Uncle Marv says haircut. You mean a scalp? Yeah, it was pretty severe. So I think that may be a trend we see in 2025 is more YouTube content creators just saying, it's not worth all the work, just to be honest with you, and dropping out.
Yeah. He's like Beetlejuice. If you say, ask Ralph too many times, he will just show up. So, coming to the stage, one and only Ralph Estep from AskRalphPodcast.com. How's it going, Ralph?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Yeah. Well, we were talking taxes. I'm like, oh, he's going to come running out of the weeds. Somebody said taxes.
So apologize to non-shave. I took a week and took a vacation to Texas to see my oldest son in the Coast Guard, and I couldn't
Nice.
find my razor in my bag. At least that's the excuse I gave my wife.
There you go. Looking good.
So I had two comments. Comment number one is I find it funny that podcasters aren't willing to pay for advertising, because any other business that you run, you pay for advertising. That's what you do. And I did that this year, and I've probably spent, I'm going to tell you, about $12,000 in advertising this year. And that's on the low side, but I've seen results from it. And that's the difference. So if you open up a plumbing shop, you do advertising. If you open up a retail store, you do advertising. Listen, if you're trying to sell yourself, if you're trying to sell a podcast, well, guess what? You're going to advertise it. There's not some, if you build it, they will come magic that's going to happen. That might happen to one or two people. Fantastic. But the truth of the matter is, if you want something to grow, you got to put money behind it. And that may be, okay, well, that's fine. My podcast is a hobby. Great. There's a great space for hobby podcasts. I think that's fantastic. And what I do in my own practice, what I look at it as an advertising cost, because I figure out putting content out there for me helps build revenue for either I'm actually writing my third book, but anyway, for those type of things. But I just think it's funny. So many people lose their minds about, well, how am I going to get my audience to grow? Well, if you want it to grow, spend money.
Yeah, it's how do you grow your podcast? By finding people who should be listening to your podcast but aren't, and then somehow get the message out that there's a podcast you should be listening to. And, that's really what it boils down to. And like I saw somebody this week, they're like, is it worth doing things on, X and Threads and Blue Sky? And I'm like, it's a trickle. It's free and it's better than nothing. But I always remember Gary Arndt, who gets 1 million downloads a month. And he said he was kind of getting squished on time and he quit doing social. And he goes, you know how much it changed my downloads? And I go, no. And he's like, it didn't change them at all. So I don't do social. He's like, I rely on word of mouth. And I'm like, so it's not that social doesn't work. It's just not the 10,000 download switch. But, and so then it's like, and then I always asked him, have you had somebody, give you some honest feedback about your show? Well, my brother said it was good. I'm like, yeah, but like, have you, gotten somebody, have you found one of your listeners? Have you done a round table with your listeners? No. And I'm like, well, then don't spend any money on it yet, because you might be spending money on a product that's not, I always point at the Logan Paul, Mike Tyson fight. A lot of people watch that thing, but if Logan Paul is doing another fight, I don't know that I'm going back because the product wasn't any good. I thought it was funny that that Netflix paid $150 million to have have NFL on Christmas, and the games were horrible. Like absolutely everyone was a blowout. And I was like, if the product's not any good, people aren't going to show up. So, yeah. What else, Ralph? You said you had two things. That was one.
So the second thing is, this is an absolutely great time, Jim. I agree with you, to start getting your affairs in order for taxes for two reasons. Number one, you've got to get that 2024 tax return done. But second thing, this is a great time to start building that infrastructure for how to move forward, because I'm not a big resolution person, but this is an ideal time to put together those things that are best for you, like setting up an entity if you want to set up an entity so that you can have the benefit of that, or whatever that looks like for you. Putting those things, I'm just giving you a hard time, Dave.
No,
But
man.
it really is the right time to do it, because
Yeah.
you're thinking about, well, I got to put my taxes together anyway. So why don't I put some things in place that moving forward, I can really know what things look like, Jim, because the truth of the matter is, again, if we're going to run this like a business, then we need to look at that monthly profit and loss report and say, here's what's come in the door, here's what's gone out. Because my grandfather used to say this all the time. I mention it on my show all the time. What gets measured gets done. And that's my accounting tip of the day. What gets measured gets done. So those were the two things. I think you guys do a great job with this show. I have learned a ton this year. And that's why, I appreciate every Saturday morning. Sometimes during tax season, I can't get here because I have other people that want my time. But you guys do a great job.
Stupid job.
And I appreciate you answering all my questions. And I did have a question, though. And I put this into the chat.
Yeah.
So with doing a daily show, here it is. There it is. That's my question. So I don't see like a big growth of the show once it gets released. Like in the first 5 days, pretty much actually in the first 24 hours, that's when I see the big grab of people getting it. Is that common for a daily show because they know there's going to be content tomorrow because they love to hear Ralph, so they know, hey, tomorrow we're going to hear more Ralph.
And the content is super daily. Like it's not evergreen. It gets old. It gets stale very quick.
Not
Like
really,
news.
because
Like news.
but not really, because Jim, the thing is, I talk about stuff that could impact you days from now. Like today's show that got released is what are some home upgrades that will actually not do well for you if you have to turn around and sell your house. I talk
Yeah.
about a client that I met from Tennessee. He inherited $100,000 from his father. He dumped it all into his house. I mean, he spent 30,000 on an audio visual room and 25,000 on a koi pond, and turned his gym or his garage into a gym. And then he went to sell his house, and he actually lost money on his house because he had to dump it because he got job transfer. But so anyway, but
Okay.
so it's
So
sort of
so
evergreen content.
don't take this the wrong way, but you have too much content then, right?
Okay.
Because people can't. There's only so many hours in the day, and on a regular downloading, they're listening to it in their car or the way in or whatever. You might have a few who are actually paying attention, but they're listening to it in a daily setting. And those kinds of tips, unless you have a way for them to rediscover them at another point in time, like encouraging them to come back and search the site, or hey, I have a whole catalog of this, or I'm making it easy to find this content. The more content you create, the harder it is for them to find it. We have this problem at Gallup all the time. I thought creating content is what they wanted. We created a lot. All the complaining I heard was, you're creating too much content. I can't consume it all. And so, if it's evergreen and it's daily, you better figure out a way for them to find that later on. Otherwise, it's just going to it'll get lost in the wash. And
So it
we just
sounds like
don't
what
have
you're
the time.
So it sounds like what you're saying is kind of the whole reason I set up Ask Ralph, because my thought was, when you have a financial decision to make, go to askralph.com, click on the link there that shows all the different episodes. So I guess my call to action, I could focus a lot more on, hey, did you know there's over 700 episodes out here now with different topics? And all my, since about, I guess about March or April, all of my episode titles are questions. And that has been huge. Like that has helped me grow immensely, because I realized, I'm not going to have the same listeners every day, because like I did one on Friday about why you shouldn't follow Tom Selleck and go get a reverse mortgage. Well, what's the small percent? But no, truth is, no, because think about it, Dave. But like, how many people are really going to be interested in a show about reverse mortgages? But what's interesting, I got the same number of downloads that I get with my normal shows. So that just tells me that there's maybe different people who want to get that content. But thank you, Jim. I think that's a great point.
Well,
So maybe that's
Ralph,
one of the things I need to do is focus on that call to action.
Your big bubble of listeners, your daily listeners who are there to listen to it, honestly, they're listening it for entertainment. It's keeping them busy, right? They're not listening to reverse mortgages because they're interested in that day. They're like, oh, maybe I'll learn something, but I like listening to Ralph, so I'll listen to this. But they're going to listen to it anyways. The very small sliver and the most engaged listeners are the ones that are going to come back and find it later when they really need it, right? That number is going to be tiny. And so you have to be, but they're the most engaged listeners. This is where measuring numbers don't really matter, in the sense that, well, they always matter, but the smaller are actually the most engaged, because they came back, they found it, they're listening to it. And you have to kind of change your mindset in the numbers game. It's not the large amount that matter at that point. It's, how do I capture those really engaged listeners that came back and found it later? Because they're the most engaged ones that you have. So that I think you're doing daily, but it's kind of like it's like a talk show. And yeah, there's great information on talk shows every day. I think I was watching the Today Show yesterday morning, and they were talking about, hey, here's what to watch out for in the new year. It was great because it kept me occupied that day. Am I going to go back and watch that a week from now? No, even if it's good advice, I've got other things I've moved on to. So make sure you'll get those bubble numbers, and that's important, the upfront ones. But in your case, you want to find a way to capture those listeners that are coming back and listening to it long after the fact, and have a way to get engaged with what you're doing. They're the valuable listens for sure.
And do you do that a lot by referencing prior episodes, Jim? Is that what you would spend a lot of time focusing on? Hey, I talked about this last Friday, go to episode X and find it. Because I've done that a lot, and I don't see a lot of traction in that. Occasionally, For example, like I had an attorney on my show to talk about estate planning. And frequently I'll say, hey, go check this out. And I'll see a couple downloads when I say that. But I don't see a huge, and Jim, like, I'm not upset about it. Like, just so we're clear, like, I look at my role as a daily show. Like, that's the way I look at it. What's Ralph going to say today? And hint, 2025, Ralph's going off the rails. So make sure you check in, because I'm going to get more provocative, because I think that's what people want to hear. Not provocative in a way that's inappropriate. Don't get the wrong idea. It's a Christian finance podcast. But that said, Jim, I'm not worried about the thing. I hear people say all the time, well, what's your downloads after 30 days? And I think for a daily podcaster, I think that can be a crushing number, because you expect this thing to grow after 30 days. And because at first I was like freaking out about it. I was like, this is terrible.
You should be monitoring how many downloads do I get on a podcast post 30 days. That's actually what's really important for you. And then for me, you ask how I measure it. I go find in my customer base, I can find those listeners on LinkedIn, because they are also certified through our platform. So this is where knowing your customers are important, right?
Yeah.
And then I follow them on LinkedIn, and I get instant feedback from them all the time of like, oh, your show helped me get through the certification process. Thanks for making it. And they'll reference shows that are 4 or 5 years old, right? And so I know they're hitting those. Now, do I have instant feedback? Well, that is instant feedback. But do I know exact numbers? No, I don't. I just know it's happening.
Yeah.
And so that's, you'll never really know until you get that email from somebody that says, hey, that email you made for me 3 years ago that I just listened to, that's great advice. You better respond to that email and shower thanks to that person. That's what you do, is when you get that feedback, you better engage with it. Some podcasters, I'm too busy to check my email.
Oh, that's
those
bad.
emails that you get from those people. And this, you're shaking your head, so I know you do this, but I heard from too many podcasters just say, I'm too busy to respond. I have hundreds of emails, and you're like,
That's when I want to knock on the door and go, excuse me, I'm here to collect your podcasting license. You've been kicked out.
Yeah, those are your most valuable listeners for sure.
Uncle Marv says he had a weekly live show, added 2 more shows a week, and his listeners said, yeah, that's too much. And then Dan said, that's kind of an issue with Netflix. Too much content makes it hard for people to pick what they want. Marcus, my other ranching friend, so Marcus has a ranch, and so does Ralph, says it might be something, maybe some of that extra content you put behind a paywall, that might be a way to monetize it. So it is tricky. It's to get back to your original question. For me, you get a big bump the first 7 days. That's all your subscribers that have finally fired up the app that they use, and it downloads that. By the time you get to 30 days, it's nothing. Like, unless it's really evergreen stuff, it's a trickle. I mean, I still get
then it's nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, evergreen is meant to be every once in a while, not a constant stream.
Every day. Yeah, no.
People I don't listen to things that way. They don't come to a podcast most of the time. They don't come to a podcast and say, I'm going to go back 4 years and listen to all the episodes. No, every once in a while you have somebody super motivated, but that is not the rule, right? You're going to get 1 in 1,000 who actually do that. Your evergreen is as evergreen as it is, only going to get found via search. Or in my case, Ralph, another way I do it is I have an active stream of 20,000 people in a Facebook group that ask me questions all the time. And you know what their answers are? Our podcasts. So I can go back and search, and they say, hey, have you talked about, or go listen to this podcast, right? So I help them find my content when it's appropriate, right? And that's another way to get that content reused, is you got to take them to it. Sometimes you got to hold their hand. You know this. You got to hold their hand, especially with finances. Hold their hand. Here's what you do. Now go listen to this and act on it, right? And even then they may not. But that's how we engage, I think.
Well, Jeff is saying he is the guy that occasionally will go back and find that answer from forever ago. So that's where Ralph said he started using the question he's answering as his title, and I think that's brilliant to have that.
Ralph, your podcast daily with all that information would be perfect for its own LLM, right? Where you start loading in the transcripts of your podcast and all the connector stuff to its own large language model. And then on your site, you would have a search, Ask Ralph. And in theory, they could put their question in there. And now it's a lot of work for them to go to Ask Ralph versus Google because we're all conditioned to do that. But you could do your own custom LLM. Now that's still, we're in the early phases of those things, and they're not, but this is where I think as podcasters with a lot of content, where we're headed is our own large language models where people could come and search, and then it would bring that information back. We built one of those at Gallup. We have our own. We took all of our content and jammed it into our own LLM to make it work. So that's another thought in 2025.
Interested in knowing how you did that, because that would be really cool. Considering I have almost 700 episodes, it's I could build a large language model like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Meta is doing this is way too much detail for this show, but Meta, right, behind Facebook, they're doing some stuff with open source LLMs. There's a little bit of work there. I've done a little bit of it and gotten some traction on it, but that's I think where we're headed.
Yeah, I saw this much of it, but I know one of the products of the year at AppSumo is some tool that helps you make AI stuff without being a coder. And they showed how you can make your own basically chatbot. And I was like, I need to come back to that. That could be interesting. So
it's not as easy as you think, but it's not impossible.
Right.
And I think what I would do is spend some time, Ralph, over the next couple months, because we're still in the early days, getting familiar with all the open source, who's doing what, just getting familiar with those things. And then by the time it is ready, you'll know. I think even you can do some of it today. The question is, how much it's going to cost and what are the services available? But that's today. I use a search app, and I forget what it's called, on my site, on my WordPress site, and it kind of builds a old search algorithm for me, which kind of improved the search on my site. Now, I stopped providing transcripts on my WordPress pages, so that kind of defeats the purpose. But you could do something like that too, where you just say, hey, and don't forget, come back to askralph.com or whatever your website is.
That's it. You got it. Askralph.com.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that's super smart. Head back to Alpha, and I've got a search, that/search, and you can find anything you need on my site. You should continue to be driving people back to, and maybe even in the old episodes, you do a dynamic ad insertion of your own ad in the very beginning and say, hey, don't forget, you can always find all the content, remind people to come to your site to get search content.
And I know you said you mentioned old episodes. Make sure those are in the show notes. So if you're like, oh, I remember back on episode 127, we'll put a link to 127 in the show notes so that you're not telling people, go find this. I'm like, no, it's right here. I mentioned it.
That's what I've been having my production people do. And it seems to be working, but I just don't see like a big uptick. Like I don't see 1,000 people go, oh, let me go do, what I'm saying? But I think it's valuable. In fact, in my third book I'm writing, I'm actually going to hyperlink episodes in the book that talk about things I talked about before. So
use trackable links on those. You'll be, again,
finance is a little nichey. Right. It's not everybody wants to listen to that kind of content. Yeah. We do. We love it, but not
3%. 3% will click on this.
Not the most popular.
Yeah.
But those who are, again, the less popular something is, when people come to it, the more engaged in it they are. And so getting a hold of those actual super engaged listeners and knowing who they are and knowing their names and sending them Christmas cards or whatever your version of that is, super important that you know who they are.
Yeah.
Who are your best listeners? They better hear from me on a fairly regular basis.
And that's why the survey that I did through PodPage was so valuable to me, because I had only 30 responses, but they were my diehard listeners. And the information I got was amazing.
Yeah.
And
make sure you send
it was
Christmas
great.
cards next year.
That was
they
really
need to
great.
hear from you. Yeah. They need to hear from you.
I gave away a $250 Amazon gift card, which drove people to it. But still, it wasn't like I just got dumb comments like, oh, send me the money. It was people were, I had one guy, actually the guy who won, and this was completely random selection. He wrote paragraphs for each of the questions. And to me, I was like, wow, like this guy took his time to actually dive in and say, here's what, and some of it wasn't flattering to me, actually. The funniest thing, I'll leave you with this, you'll crack up. So it's a Christian finance podcast, right? This guy put in there, as a Muslim, I find you talk about Christ too much. And I'm thinking, why are you listening to my show?
Yeah.
Because he finds the information valuable.
Right. He's a client too. And that's what I went back to. And I said, so I actually called this guy and I'm like, explain that to me. He goes, you have character. I don't care. But sometimes you could lay off the Christ stuff and just tell me about finances. Right. So I'm like, no, that's cool. That works. But anyway, thanks guys. I appreciate your time.
You bet, Ralph.
We'll see you, buddy.
Jumping in. Well, thanks for
Take care.
jumping in. Dave, you
Yeah.
ran into that problem with your you said Invisible Sky Buddy for a while there, and I even remember School Podcasting you read it, I think, got a real negative comment about.
Yeah, there was one guy. That's where it came from. This guy. I still have a show. It's still there. I don't do it anymore. Called Feeding My Faith, and I played a promo for it. And this guy said, "Hey man, I didn't tune in to hear about your Invisible Sky Buddy," and I love that. So it went on for about a month. What was interesting, it was the atheists that came out and said, "No, Dave, keep doing you. Like you be you."
Yeah.
And if that guy doesn't want to listen, because I don't know what his problem was, but we did have a bunch of questions come in. I wanted to hit this one from Matt. Yeah, said, if my podcast guest is something that is known to be unsupported by myself and by my podcast position, should I confront them? What do you think, Jim?
Well, don't ever confront anybody on your podcast, for God's sake. This isn't the place you confront people. Unless it's a podcast about confrontation. I mean, if you wanted to listen, this is where Ricky Lake and who's the guy?
Jerry Springer, Geraldo Rivera.
They made a living off confrontation, but confronting people, convincing people, unless it's a show about that, like
I would say, instead of you personally confronting them. So Jim says something like, the best microphone is a Blue Yeti. And I'm sitting here with my head ready to explode. I might go, well, what would you say to the person that says the Blue Yeti picks crickets farting up outside, it's overpriced? What would you say to that person? That's how I might confront them. Like, it's not me. I'm there are people that are going to say that. Because that's, to me, I think it's entertaining. In a way, if you can get a little back and forth going on. I don't know that I would purposely, like, every time they say my favorite color is blue, and you go, how dare you? Like, no, don't confront them on anything. But edit it out.
If you and I started fighting every show, and we were angry at each other all the time and saying you were wrong and all the time, that has not been our style for the last 8 years, right? We would make people uncomfortable. You and I, or do a pretty good job. Maybe once every couple of weeks I say, I don't agree with you, or you say, I don't agree with you. But we'd make the kids uncomfortable. Like, the kids in the chat room would be like, why are they fighting so much? Now, if we started off this thing by fighting, and that had been our MO, we would have gathered a bunch of people who liked the fighting. And so,
Well, a great example of this now is the New Media Show. And it's basically two people that are now getting their podcast news from very different sources. Like Rob Greenlee is reading, Variety, and I don't know what Rob's reading, but Rob is very much YouTube is video, is a podcast, and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of, sometimes I like listening to it because I know I'm like, oh, that's going to poke Todd's, button. And to see if, but there also comes a time when I'm like, oh God, are they just going to argue all day? Is that another episode of them just arguing? So,
Well, but they changed a little bit. It didn't used to be that way.
No, it didn't used to be that way at all.
It was not. I listened to them a long time ago and they'd have and that's what I listened to them for. And there's a difference between arguing and disagreeing and all the point, I think, in this is that you attract a certain number of listeners to a certain style. And if all of a sudden we changed our style, now, can we? Sure, we absolutely could. If we wanted to, we can. There's no rules in this. If we wanted to, we can. I guarantee you, though, there would be a group of you who would be like, peace out. I don't want to listen to these guys. I'm not listening to them anymore. So you have to be ready. You have to be ready for that fallout if that's what you're going to do. Listen, we turn over people in the chat room all the time. The chat room today is not the chat room it was 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah.
There's going to be natural turnover in this, but I think you and I have been pretty consistent across the 500 and whatever episodes. What is this? What do you think this one is? 5 something?
515-ish something. Okay. Yeah.
Been fairly consistent because you are you and I am me, and we liked each other when we started this, and we like each other today. Right?
Right.
So,
And we don't always agree, which is good, so that's the good news. I'm trying. Today is 5:14. There we go. I was close.
okay. There we
Um,
go. Yeah.
if we, oh yeah, here we were talking about affiliates earlier. Rich Graham brings up a great point. Do you all know about the Honey Chrome extension scam? It will hijack affiliate links. Yeah, this is where I think I posted this on Facebook. I said, oh, look, another large company doing really bad things because Honey is owned by PayPal. And what was interesting is you have all these influencers who might be using affiliate links. And like when you go to Walmart and Honey goes, oh, I think I've got a coupon for this. If I sent somebody to Walmart and told them to use Honey, so now your audience is using Honey, normally you would get maybe an affiliate commission by sending them to Walmart. Well, now when they click on Honey and go any coupons, you lose the affiliate link, and Honey, which is PayPal, takes over the affiliate link. And I don't think anybody knew that when you're doing that, this company's going, any affiliate links you had going to that company are going to be doing that. Yeah.
This is interesting because it's run by PayPal. Like,
right.
This is not some small company that's doing nothing. This is PayPal. And it'll be interesting to see. I mean, this is fairly newish news. It'll be interesting to see if PayPal can stand up to this kind of hate, because it's getting a lot of hate right now, especially in the influencer space. And what if a bunch of influencers start saying, delete Honey from all your browsers and all these kinds of things? They could do this. They have all this kind of influence. If they got cheated by Honey, they could also hurt Honey by going out to their influencing groups and say, hey, look, they're taking things. Now, make sure you know what you're talking about when you do something like that. You don't want to come out and say they're criminals, they're scammers. That's liable. So you might
don't call people liars. That got me in trouble. So yeah. Well, that's I use Acorns for my personal checking and stuff. It's a online banking thing, and they have a thing where I can get percentage of the sale off. Well, I know they're getting paid an affiliate commission for every time I go to Walmart. I try to shop at Walmart online and then pick it up because I get a percentage of that sale goes into my checking account because I'm using an affiliate link from Acorns, and then I'm off to so it's like, hey, like yesterday I earned, I think it was 38 whole cents, not 37 and not 39. 38 cents went into my savings account because I shopped at Acorn. So we were talking about advertising earlier, and John Jamango said, I've noticed that there's an increase in ad spots in most of my podcasts. One pre-roll ad turned into 3. And I can't stand the crowbarred ads in the middles of a sentence. It's really annoying. Yeah, I've had people complain because I was playing with the ad stuff on this show, and they came in. So I'm now looking at where I insert ads, because Buzzsprout kind of does it automatically. But I also noticed the shows that I listen to of people that are doing this for a living, when the price of ads goes down, the number of ads in their shows go up because they got to eat. And that's where I'm like, that's where I don't think advertising, it is a stream of income, but I wouldn't say it's the best because you don't control the pricing in many cases. I would like to see that happen in 2025, because all we do is get reports on how great podcast advertising works. It's great for branding. It's great for this. It's the best. It outsells, email. It outsells, radio and TV combined. And I'm like, okay, great. Then why aren't we charging more? That's my whole thing. And it's like, if you noticed, Libsyn's AdvertiseCast, or whatever, the Libsyn ads now, they used to say, here's the average CPM, and it was 25, and then it was 24, and then it was 23. And it was like, okay. And then they're like, hey, we're not going to be announcing that anymore. And I go, yeah. And I go back to banner ads. Back in the early days of websites, people were making decent money with banner ads because there were only so many websites. And then, WordPress came along, and Dreamweaver and all this stuff made it really easy to make a website. And all of a sudden, banner ads, the pricing went because everybody had a website. It's supply and demand. So anytime I see things about, you can make money from day one, I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, it's better than a poke in the eye kind of money, but not by much. So
Well, and Dave, if you're a small podcast, a dynamic ad insertion probably
Is
not your
no.
friend. Not your friend. I'd much rather when you're small. Again, you have a very engaged audience when you're small. I would much rather if you're looking to monetize, I'd monetize in a way that's very personal to those very engaged listeners. This is where merch, like, look, they're listening to your show and nobody else is. They're super engaged. Chances are, if you make a T-shirt, they'll probably buy it. That they did on Home Gadget Geeks. In fact, I should make more T-shirts. They bought those things, right? So I think if you're a small podcaster in the early days, go with something like merch or something that really engages those. Patreon is a great way to do it because they're very, very engaged. Dynamic ad insertion is just not your friend. I am not. I kind of it kind of ruined some the way we
Yeah.
do advertising,
Well,
and I don't
I
know,
just
I'm not a big fan of it.
I just saw this movie called The Fire Within about this Olympic boxer, and there's a line in the movie where she wins a gold medal, expects to come home and be on a Wheaties box, and just nothing happens, and she's living in almost poverty and just a horrible, childhood, and she's like, all right, I got my gold medal, and nothing happens, and so she's trying to get endorsements and stuff, and this one guy, and they're basically trying to like, hey, you box, you're a little masculine. I'm like, yeah, I'm a female boxer. Shocking, and they're trying to shape her into something she's not. And she was really getting mad. And they go, well, is it the money? Oh crap! I just played the clip a minute ago, and I can't remember the quote. Is it the money? Is it the and not acknowledgement?
Recognition.
Recognition. Yeah.
Recognition.
Is it the money? Is it the recognition? Is it the money? And she goes, money is recognition. And I was like, huh. And I wonder sometimes if that's why podcasters equate success with when I have sponsors, I will be legit. And I'm like, which I get that, but like you are legit the minute you hit record on a microphone, and there are many other ways to be acknowledged than money. Now we like money, right? I can't pay for groceries with a really nice email from, Jill from Poughkeepsie, but I think that's why so many times people will take really bad programmatic ads because then they can go, yeah, I made $2.13 last month.
Maybe keeping you from making more. I think money is the hardest thing to get. It's just not, people aren't just throwing it around. And I'm talking about not people scamming you out of money, but I'm talking about real money, right? And I think it's hard to get, and that's why people see that as pure recognition. If someone is willing to separate their money and give it to you, separate it from them and give it to you, there's a lot of recognition in that. I wouldn't discount that at all. I think that's super important for some folks. Yeah, and listen, in an altruistic way, Dave, it's super. The minute you've made a podcast, you've won. Whatever you want to say, however you want to say that, I get it. But it really, I think when people start, when the checks start coming in, and you're like, oh, $1,000, wow, that feels pretty good, right? And so I do think the money talks in that case. And if you want to be a hobby, again, if you want to be a hobby podcaster, you're not in it for the money or for the entertainment, right. Awesome. Then you've got your priorities, but not everybody's built that way, right? And even as a hobby podcaster, if your hobby was making you money, you're kind of like, this is even better, So I think it is a good form of recognition.
Yeah, let's jump in here. Except I forgot to. Speaking of recognition, yeah, let's recognize our awesome supporters, and thank you to everyone, because I realize we always talk about the $20 supporters. Thank you to the $5 supporters and the $10 supporters. If you go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, you can see all those people. And this show is brought to you by the School of Podcasting.com, where we have courses, we have unlimited coaching, and an amazing community. You can use the coupon code COACH. And don't forget that comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And we're running on Podpage. If you want to check out Podpage, it's simple. Go over to trypodpage.com, and that is my affiliate link. That is something I think in 2025 we're going to hear more of, because the FTC is gearing up for influencers. They did their warning shot about 6 months ago. They had a thing on like ftc.gov.influencer. Like they made a video that simply said, And that is, you have to disclose when it's an affiliate link. And I'm still not as good as I should be on that, where I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, that's an affiliate link. So we're using Ecamm right now to stream live. You can find that at askthepodcastcoach.com/Ecamm. And yes, that is my affiliate link. And that guy right over there, Jim Cullison. If you want more Jim, and who doesn't, go over to theaverageguy.tv. And now it's time for the Wheel O Names.
Woo-hoo, woo-hoo.
And will it be a repeat from Glenn, or Max over at Aviation News Talk, or Ed Sullivan, or Ross Brand? Who will it be? Well, we're going to click the wheel, and we will find out as it goes round and round and round. It looks like it might be Randy. It is. It was almost Craig from AI Goes to College. There you go, Randy, over at Bible Bites, his website, Bible-Bites, and Bites is BYTES. It's inspiring faith one bite at a time. Randy, thank you for being an awesome supporter. What I need to do is, the way Buzzsprout does this, I put them in as a pre-roll. Like, hey, today's show is brought to you by Randy Bites. Yeah, Randall Black. You should be more like Randy. And I can see how many times that pre-roll was played. So I need to show people like, hey, you had 600 mentions in my show this week. So thank you, Randy, for that. We do deeply appreciate it. And if this show, hey, if we saved you time, if we saved you money, maybe a couple headaches, or if we kept you educated, well, then you can go over and be an awesome supporter. Simply go to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And I just mentioned him. He was almost the winner this week. Craig over at AI Goes to College. And this is going to be one of the questions that will not die in 2025. And it's a good question. It shouldn't die. And that is, can I do a podcast without video? He said that jokingly, but there are people asking that question. There are people that are, and this is my biggest fear, they think you have to do video. And I'm like, no, you don't have to do video. You can do just audio if you want to. In fact, Mark, we were talking to him earlier. He said, we decided to start audio only to keep it simple. We're also initially only going to focus on Instagram and Facebook to engage with our audience. Yeah, if you try to be everywhere, sometimes that'll burn you out. So figure, for me, I do a lot of stuff on X, and people are like, how dare you? Elon is the Antichrist. And I'm like, well, I'm there, and most of my people are there, and like, so I'm going to stay there, and rather than post the same thing on 12 different places. Craig from I can never say this, La Mancha del Inglés. Here's the thing. I started to learn, I made it about 3 months where I was doing a Spanish lesson every day. So one thing is, I was kind of looking at, New Year's resolutions and stuff. I was like, hey, I started to learn Spanish last year, and I just kind of, was like, oh, okay, because I had a streak going. It was like 90 days in a row, and I was like, I need to go back and do that. So, because all I still only know how to say is, yo como manzanas, which is I eat apples. And that's about it. Other than that, and counting to 10, I'm worthless. So Craig says, any ideas you have for video in 2025? Have you started planning out content? What I've basically, and I do it every week, is, I'll give you an example. I did a deep dive, which makes me sound like I'm AI. I delved into media hosts. I did an episode on that and just went over their features and said, here's who has this feature, here who has that feature, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a part of me that goes, that would have been a good YouTube video. And it's always like, yeah, you should record that. And that's as far as I get. So I've got a teleprompter right here. I'm like, all I need to do is put bullet points and look at this thing and, say it. Because I used to do little 4-minute, here's a quick tip from Dave kind of stuff on YouTube. And somehow in my head, it something messed up in my head to where I'm not doing it anymore. I still do this. This goes on. And I do tons of videos for Podpage. I'm like, okay, get back on the horse there, buddy. I don't know what caused me to get off of it, but yeah, so there's that. Jim, are you going to be doing anything different with video in 2025?
No, same stuff. I do have our marketing team on the Gallup side of things is going to be trying to release some of our content in a little shorter form. There is some thoughts like, oh yeah, if we do it right, this will work well on these platforms. I've told that team I'm a long form guy, not a short form guy. I'll do what I can to make the content short for them. And they were like, oh, that's great. We'll figure out how to get it done and do some of those things that way. So, again, our content does better when it's very targeted and very targeted to a person. Yeah, the average person who's never heard about Clifton Strengths before, if you say, hey, the Clifton Strengths theme of a ranger means, they're like, I don't care what that, like, that's not a natural connection, right? That does, but when we have a customer who's come in and taken the assessment and now they have some questions about it, that's when I want to grab them with our content, right? So I've narrowed down the audience. We have about 5,000 people that take that assessment every single day. I've narrowed down that audience from 8 billion, which is around the world, to 5,000 a day. Now they stack that up over the course of a year. That's enough. That's a lot of numbers. They're not all going to get to it and they're not all going to find it, but it's a very niche audience. All of our stuff is set to attract people who've post-assessment say, hey, we've got some resources for you. I don't necessarily see my podcast as a podcast. I see it as a resource, as creating resources for folks after they've taken the assessment. I'm very clear in my own mind on to what that is. So I expect the numbers to be lower. It's one of the battles I've had internally over time. It's like, Jim, why doesn't this get, 10,000 or 100,000 downloads a year? And you're like, because that's not who we target. We're targeting a very engaged audience, very specific at a very specific time. I know it works because I hear from them. So the numbers are going to be small, but the value is going to be large. That's an idea. No matter how many times I say it, there's just people who can't get past that. They're like, yeah, but why isn't it 100,000? Like, I just told you why. This is a different, this is a different way of interacting with your customers. And honestly, Dave, I think a lot of podcasters don't get this. They think, oh, if I don't have 10,000 downloads, I'm not successful. And I want to like, well, if that's your measurement, yeah, then you're not successful.
Yeah.
But there's other ways to measure engagement. And
I had people contact me this week because I put out an episode and I said, hey, let's look at the pros and cons of video. And one of the things I said go in and look at your completion rate. I said, so you might be getting a fair amount of views on YouTube, but how far are people watching? And then go into Apple and Spotify and see how far they're listening on an audio podcast. I said, I think you'll be surprised. And I had a few people like, oh, I had no idea. I was all giddy, I say, about, my YouTube numbers until I went and looked and saw that they're, maybe making it 20%. And I was like, well, that's kind of normal for YouTube. I'm like, I'm just giving you what I see. You make your decision kind of thing. So we would think YouTube would be more of an engaging platform than our podcasts at Gallup, but that's not the truth for what I do, for what I make. The podcast episodes run wild over the YouTube views. I mean, wild. And people are like, doesn't that seem a little weird? I'm like, no, because that's the way the content works. One of the things, we just went over 5 million downloads to our podcast. Wow.
This year. 5 million. Like, I'll take 5 million of anything. And so people always ask, well, how do you get there? It's like one download at a time over the last 10 years, 2 million a year. That's not too bad when you start thinking about those numbers. But listen, I'll celebrate that. I have my DR is on Monday, and I'll celebrate that number with my manager, and we'll woohoo, and then it'll be like, what have you done for me lately? So, there's some still work to be done at that point, but those numbers can start stacking up after a while, and having a good of knowing what that means. Listen, 5 million over 10 or 11 years. Is that the number I'm looking for? I don't know. I'll celebrate it for a few minutes, and then we'll move forward with like, okay, so how am I going to start reaching my customers on January 1? Because you can't, you can't sit back and go, oh, look at what we've created. There's always work to be done.
Yeah. My target number is to be more than it was last week, even if it's 4 more. If it's more than it was last week, I'm heading in the right. Now I want more than 4, obviously, but it's tricky. Ray says
our target should be to make better content.
There you go. That's
the numbers will happen.
Yeah. What constitutes a view on YouTube? I know it's less than a minute, which is what constitutes a listen in IAB standards. But on YouTube, I don't know if you have to blink at it 3 times to be a view. I don't know if somebody else can, maybe in the chat room. I've never looked that up. I just know it's, that's the way it is. It was only 1 second of video at one time. Not sure if that's still the case. Wow.
That's so discouraging.
Yeah.
Listen, again, that's why if you're going to base your success off those numbers, you kind of to stop doing that. Base it off engagement.
Yeah. Tanner has a question, which will be interesting because, Jim, I know your answer on this. I've been trying to build a Facebook group. Do you still recommend building a community there or on a platform like Discord? I would do it because I guess you can pay for Discord. I would pay for it then. Or I'm a big fan. If everybody's wondering why I put a link to Heartbeat in the chat about 2 minutes ago, that's why. Because that's my favorite platform. I use it for the School of Podcasting. But my problem at the School of Podcasting, and if I had courage, I would kill my Facebook group. And the reason I don't like Facebook is I went into my own Facebook group one day and I said, hey, Lunch with Dave starts in 20 minutes. And the next thing I know, I was banned from my own Facebook group for spam. And I go, no, it's my group. I was letting them know I was doing group coaching. And they're like, here's the resources that you can use to get help at Facebook. And I went through all of them about 5 times and got 0 response. And the only thing that saved me is there are 2 Dave Jacksons. Dave Jackson is podcast guy. David Jackson is trying to see pictures of his nieces and nephews. And luckily, David Jackson was in my Facebook group, so I could still communicate. But if I hadn't had a split personality, I would have been completely locked out of my Facebook group. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't till I went on my microphone and said, hello, good podcast people. Does anybody know anybody at Facebook? And luckily, somebody's cousin, through divorce minus their stepson's brother's, knew somebody. And I got back into Facebook. So that's why because of one really negative experience, I'm not a big Facebook group person. I think they're, now if it's free, because I know Mark over at practicalprepping.info has an insane number of people in his Facebook group. So this is again where sometimes it's like, I remember when the guy from Volley, which is another app that you can build community in and things like that, he said, go into Facebook and look at your groups and see how many you have. And when was the last time you were in those groups? And when I did that exercise, I was like, I am in a lot of groups that I haven't been in years. And he's like, so a lot of times people, their ego gets the best of them because they're like, I have 500 million, zillion, kajillion people in my group. And I get that. But how many, like when I'm managing the Facebook group for Podpage, and when I get the stats on it, I'm like, well, that's depressing. So I don't know. It's a Facebook group's hard to go. And Jim, how many people you got in your group? You have a lot.
We have 3 groups. 2 of them have 20,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had to clamp down this year, second half of the year. I really started clamp downing on the posts. It got really spammy, but not from Facebook because groups are fairly well protected. It got spammy from the folks in the group. They just started advertising to each other. And then I got people who complained, who were like, hey, I didn't join this group to be be sold to on. And I had some folks every day there was a new advertisement in there. And I had to clamp down and say no. However, I tried to leave Facebook at one point with these groups and there was a revolt. They're like, no, I don't want to go to another place. This is where depends on the demographic. In your audience, right? They were like, I don't want to go someplace. This is just easy for me. Can we just keep it here? We almost developed our own, and we still may at some point. Groups are tough. I'm not a big, and you could go Discord. You can go anywhere your audience is. Like chances are you're going to need to go to a couple places. Over the last couple years, I'm not a big believer. There was a book that came out 30 years ago called The Wisdom of the Crowd. And the whole idea was that together we're better. And I think in some cases that's true. But I would add together we're better when we're heavily moderated.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. Because just open groups of people, especially when they're anonymous and there's no accountability. I watched more groups like that crater than I've watched them be successful. And there's always exceptions. But I just don't think necessarily without heavy moderation at times we are better that way. In some of those kinds of groups, they need to be monitored in a lot of ways. So be careful what you wish for when it comes to the group settings. That may or may not be the best way to have your groups interact. I don't know. Just be careful. That's what I've learned. I've had to do some heavy-handed stuff just to bring the groups back to being constructive.
Yeah, I unfortunately have two communities, which is the direct opposite of what a community is. A community is people coming together. And I tried to leave Facebook, and I had enough people go, no, like I live in Facebook. And then I have other people that are like,
Yeah.
I'll be like, and you can join the community. The first thing they say is like, oh God, please tell me it's not on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, the official one's on Heartbeat, but I have two. And so if somebody says something that I'm like, ooh, this needs to, like I'm in both. And so I'll kind of cross-pollinate, which is interesting because sometimes Facebook will be much more like engaged, and there are other times when Heartbeat will just take off. So I'm like, okay,
What's interesting in a professional setting is people will say things on Facebook that they would never say on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn has a kind of a professional, there's a little bit of pressure to be a professional. Although I'm noticing LinkedIn is becoming like people are posting New Year's Eve family party things just like they would post on Facebook. But for a while, there was at least a little social pressure to keep it kind of professional and not maybe have, now maybe the groups I'm in, this doesn't happen, but not have the back and forth, battles that we have on Facebook, or we call each other mean things and ugly names and all that other kind of stuff. But I've physically watched a person have a Facebook persona that's one thing, and a LinkedIn persona that's something completely different. And you're like, oh, that's kind of an interesting social dynamic. So I think the platform kind of matters too. I'm sure across the platforms, all of them, you might have a different experience on the way people interact with some of those kinds of things. I do know this, the more anonymous things are, the nastier they get.
Oh man. Yeah.
So that's maybe not 100% universal, but maybe 99.9% universal.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. I know Mark over from the Practical Prepping show. He has, I think now 3 moderators, because I think he has, I forget, it's an insane number of people that's in his Facebook group. And it just became, and he clearly states no politics, no this and that, no this, no. And he goes, but people still try. And he has a like one idiot, like you get one strike, you're out kind of rule. He's like, we don't have time. When it gets this big, and we've clearly stated what you can and can't do, and you come in and do the direct opposite, you're gone. And it's like, you got to be ready to kick people out. So keep that in mind.
I say on my site, no ads. And so what now people do is that Merry Christmas. And if you'd like, if you'd like to buy, or, and it's this very thinly veiled, is that the way to say it? Thinly veiled advertisement. And, at the end is a link to their webpage where they can buy services. Like, no, that's not, if a nice little Merry Christmas graphic with you telling the group Merry Christmas, that's fine. But a business ad thinly veiled as a Merry Christmas, no, it's not going to make it. Not going to make it into the group.
Well, it's funny because the No Agenda show is all about value for value, and they're like, we can't have advertisers. Well, what's happened is if you give them, I think it's $250, they'll read a small note from you. Well, everybody's figured out that small note can be, hey, do you need a resume? There's a resume lady that sends them $250 a week. Like, I will write a resume that works. There's Eli, the coffee guy. Like, there's a bunch of guys, and their branding's working because I'm starting to remember their brand. But I'm like, yeah, that's an ad. I know it's value for value, but I'm like, that's an ad. So, Craig says he's quoting the one and only Todd Cochran. Why is this showing up on your screen?
Yeah, I see it. It was just
I see what it is. This is one of those weird things where I'm using the teleprompter and I can't see the bottom of the screen. Yeah, don't build your house on rented land. Yeah, that's the thing to keep in mind. Ray absolutely crushed it. We're talking about surveys. 24% of my listening audience responded to my survey. I call that insane engagement. I don't call that successful. Randy did some digging. Randy Black, the current featured supporter of the week, said it looks like YouTube is 30 seconds now to be counted as a view. So that's, again, not to pop your bubble. I know you're a top 5% podcaster, according to Listen Notes, but that's and somewhere I just saw it. You have another hour and 5 minutes. Chris Nesi, chrisnesi.com, went and submitted his. Just recorded my favorite podcast for 2024, Dave. He's submitting it now. So yes, get that in. I really love hearing the why, even though it's always kind of the same question, the same answers. But that's kind of also good. It's like, hey, here's what people are looking for, and here's what people are not. Because that's usually the last episode of the School of Podcasting is what's your favorite podcast. And typically in January, I will kick off with what's your top pet peeve. And those typically don't change, volume and, too much chit chat and that whole 9 yards. So 2025 should be interesting because we're going to see a lot of Spotify talk because they got a big budget and they're already coming. I can't wait. I think it's 3 days. Let's see. 3 days will get us to the end of the year. Okay. Within a week, Spotify is going to announce something. I'm under NDA when it comes out to not like, I can't say what it is, but it was, well, I won't talk about it, but I was underwhelmed by, if that's the announcement they're going to announce, I was underwhelmed. But I think there's going to be a lot of Spotify talk from Spotify saying how great Spotify is. And I think we're going to hear YouTube, all the closed, walled gardens, the Spotifys and YouTubes are going to be explaining just how great they are. And then you're going to have the people doing the open RSS thing. I don't know if we're the middle class or what, but we're going to be slogging away in our little podcast apps. The one thing I really want to see move forward is the whole, like podcasting 2.0, the streaming thing. That kind of took a back seat the last month because technology and things changed. I'm like, okay, that's fine. We found out what didn't work. Now let's come back and make it super easy to do that. I was kind of bummed that Marco, the guy behind Overcast, there's a link you can put in your feed that will put, it used to in Overcast, a little $, and people could click on it, and that could be your Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal or whatever, and people could give you money. And he took that out of the app, and I guess he's worried about Apple. Anytime you make money through your app, Apple wants 30% of that. So I think that's why he took that out. But so it'll be fun to Jim, any overall predictions for 2025?
Oh,
yeah.
It's good. We've been talking about it for the last couple of weeks. Yeah, nothing more than we haven't already said. It'll be an interesting year. I think there's a lot of here in the United States as we change, as we gain a new president. What's new is what's old is new. What's new is old. Anyways, as we gain a new administration, it'll be interesting to see where we go. I think lots of stuff going on around podcasting. I think we just continue to see more consolidations. I don't think that, I think a lot of folks get bought. I think there's been a lot of hopes and dreams that either haven't panned out or have really panned out. And of course that just means consolidation. So I think we'll see more purchases.
I'll be interested to see what happens with AI because there's definitely that guy out there. And yes, it's a guy that's saying, I've made insane amounts of money in insanely short amount of time. And all I did was type in a few things into ChatGPT. And if you give me 3 easy payments of blah, 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 I will show you how to do it. And look at me, I'm on a boat. There's definitely that guy's going to come out of the woodwork. And there are going to be a lot of people that, Jeff C says 2025 will be the year of podcasts or video or short form comment or whatever.
But
I think we're going to see a lot of I know I am using AI 500% more than I was 3 months ago. But it's taking, like when I write newsletters now, I'll write it, I'll throw it into ChatGPT, and all I say is, this is a newsletter for podcasters, and I'm trying to inspire them to do whatever, blah, blah, blah. Here's the newsletter, paste. And my prompt is, make this better. That's it. That's all I say, make this better. And it's like, and I'll look at it, I'm like, yep, that's better. Still accurate, copy, paste, done. So I'm using ChatGPT and
it's a great editor.
Yeah, Craig was Perplexity is now my default search engine, and I'm listening to AI Goes to College. So I'm hanging out next to Craig because keeping up with the tools. Mike Russell has a channel. I think it's Creator Wizardry or something like that. And he's showing off so many tools that I'm like, I can't keep up with this. So it's gonna be that's the one. AI and video, I think, are gonna be the two things that I'm gonna be watching.
This video thing you guys keep talking about, I don't know where. It's always been about video, and so I don't know why all of a sudden everybody's talking about video now. Video has been popular and has been a thing in podcasting for at least a decade.
Yeah.
And so I just don't, I'm still trying to figure out, like, why are you guys talking about video? Why are we talking about YouTube? That's old news. So I don't know. I don't understand that. I don't know why that's becoming. Is it because Spotify said something?
Yeah, it's because Spotify and YouTube have come out and said, video is here to save the day. Video will wipe your butt and wash your car. It's and so there's people like me. Like, note to self: check how video is going in July. With all these people, like, all I got to do, like this guy said, I paid him 3 easy payments. All I got to do is change my thumbnail on YouTube, and I'll be a star, and I'll be like the Hawk Tuah girl. It's like, so I don't want to be a negative Nancy, but it's just like. I think a lot of people are going to jump into YouTube and audio, find it overwhelming, and then go either A, I'm going to quit, which will make me cry, but hopefully they'll go, well, one of these has to go. So either go be a YouTuber or go be a podcaster, but doing both at the same time it's just a lot of it's a lot of expenses. It's a lot more time. It's like, it's not as easy as it sounds. So. Chris says the rise of video has been predicted every year since I can remember. Yeah. And again, I say, go Google. I need to make a post on this, but the reason YouTube is saying this is TikTok is eating its lunch and starting to, and they're like, we got to get people talking about YouTube again.
Is it?
I'd
love to see some numbers on this. I would tend to think YouTube does more views than all podcasts download combined.
It's not. No. It's kind of like Spotify and Apple. Like, is Spotify starting to take some of Apple's lunch? Yeah, absolutely. But is Apple still way in the lead? Absolutely. But it's the point where YouTube is like, we have this thing. It just took another 4%. Like, it's up to 12%. For the first year ever, some of our stats are going down. We should probably pay attention to this.
I feel like some podcasters just woke up and they're like, hey, there's this new thing called YouTube. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I just don't get it. I'm not following why we're spending so much time on video. And back to the argument, I know we're over time, but back to the argument of, is a podcast video or is video a podcast?
Yeah.
Stop it. Stop it. Just stop it, please.
The only reason
matter. It's
the only reason I bring it up is because we're going to get all sorts of year-end reports now about podcasting, and I'm going to go, is that a podcast or is it a YouTube? And that's when I need
to say, if they're going to report, they need to say.
Yeah, and that's what. But now, because Jim, because you have a microphone in your shot, and so do I.
Yeah.
We're podcasters. That's what they say. That's legit. That's a reason why we're podcasting.
I'm okay with that.
So,
and even if we don't, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, it just messes up all the reporting. That's the thinking.
No, right on. I get you.
So, Jim, what's coming up? Are you taking a week off or anything?
I did take the week off. It's Christmas. It was Boxing Day, so I took the 26th off and. Go listen to somebody else's podcast and go listen to Dan's based on truestorypodcast.com.
There you go. And speaking of that, thanks to Dan, thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co. And we will be here next week. We'll be whatever the 5th or something of we'll be talking about
first
2026
and 2025. Let's make some 2026 predictions next year next Saturday. Everything about 2026 and how video will be important in the new year.
That's it. On the School of Podcasting, because I'm going to start working on it in 55 minutes. I will be assembling all the what's your favorite podcast and why, but also then you get to say, oh, by the way, my show is theaverageguy.tv, where I talk about, geeketry in gadgets in the home. Check it out at theaverageguy.tv. So give me your elevator pitch about you. So, and please say your website in a pace that I can understand it. There are no rewards. There's no, hey, and the person that said their domain the fastest goes to, no, because people love to go, oh yeah, my website is schoolpodcast.com. Like, what? Like, okay, great. And then I've literally had to go in and like slow it down. And I'm like, there are times when I'm like, look, I can't, if you don't give me the name of your show, you don't get a link in the show notes. That's part of the deal. So, but we will be here next week. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. If you like the show, tell a friend. If you hate the show, tell 2 friends. And tell them to go to AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. We'll see you next week.